They weren't myths. They weren't bedtime stories handed down with nice endings. Buried in clay, buried under sand, locked for 5,000 years. The earliest records of human beginnings have just been stitched back together by machines. And what the tablets say, if the translations hold, it changes the whole story of who we are. The tablets that wouldn't speak. Imagine a warehouse full of shelves, dust motes drifting in thin sunbeams, wooden crates, glass cases, clay tablets, cracked like old skin, labeled, cataloged, then forgotten. For over 100 years, scholars picked at these fragments like archaeologists with tweezers, patient, methodical, careful. They made progress, but the language fought them. Cuneiform shifts like quicksilver. Signs change with context. A single wedge could mean 10 things, so most tablets stayed silent. Bits of creation songs here, legal codes there, names, lists, the occasional prayer. Pieces that never formed a whole. Then 2025 happened. Machine learning models trained on thousands of cuneiform lines began to predict missing characters. They learned dialects, Old Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and historian and algorithm together started to assemble sentences that humans had never been able to finish. What came back was not poetry about gentle gods. It was a record, a system, a blueprint. Creation as process, not moment. We were taught that humans were made from clay. The tablets do say that, but they don't stop there. The AI translations reveal layers, stages, trials, failed runs. Humans aren't described as a single, unified act of creation. They are described as models, iterations, prototypes. Read and sequence the lines repeat testing. Shape, test, name, judge. Some forms pass and continue. Some fail and are discarded. Some are altered and tried again. That word, discarded, is horrifying when you say it in this voice. Because these tablets don't speak of myths alone. They read like logs from a workshop. They catalog materials, clay of different kinds, blood, binding agents, and the outcomes of each trial. They list instructions. They list categories. This isn't poetry, it's process. Classified at birth. Here is where the idea becomes ugly and heavy and impossible to ignore. The tablets use different terms where we expected one. Words that had been glossed as man or people suddenly split apart when the AI put phrases in context. One term shows up tied to obedience and service. Another phrase repeats in lists associated with ritual, learning, priesthood. A third cluster appears with work, heaviness, lack of name. Run those together and the implication is raw. Humans were sorted from the very beginning. Not by geography, not by accident, but by purpose. One group appears repeatedly described as being made to not multiply, designed in the text's own language as temporary, obedient labor. Another group is refined to think, to name, to pass knowledge forward. They could speak, they could learn, they could reproduce. If you let that sit, the next sentence lands hard. Some early humans were engineered not to leave descendants. Imagine a workforce made for a season and then gone. Imagine being built for a job, never for a future. Gods in a workshop. The text named gods we know, Enki, Enlil, Anu. But the tone is bureaucratic. These aren't capricious deities handing out fates with poems. They're making decisions. Enki appears as the tinkerer, the god of craft and water and wisdom. He experiments, he makes corrections, he upgrades. He's the one who adds something new. Reproduction, autonomy, speech, to a particular line of humans. That line becomes a bridge. The name Adapa appears as the prototype of that bridge. Wise enough to reason, limited enough to obey. Enlil is different. Enlil is order. Enlil fears disorder. Enlil prefers predictability and obedience. Where Enki sees potential for growth, Enlil sees chaos waiting to happen. The two gods argue. The disagreements aren't metaphorical. They read like policy fights. How much power should be given? Who gets knowledge? Who gets tools? And the answer is chilling. Knowledge is a privilege, and privilege is ration. The database of origins. AI didn't invent this framework, it found it. When the translations are set side by side, the tablet fragments stop being isolated lines of fancy and begin to read like entries in a registry. There are names and categories, places and roles, and repeated tests. One passage lists a place described as a flat land between rivers, a factory floor-like description where forms are shaped, measured, and named. The tablets mention naming ceremonies and performance assessments. Some creations are returned to the mountain, others are cast into the river. Language here is blunt. What we have is a record of structured development, not the poetic tale of God's breathing life into clay, but the log of an engineering process with assessments, revisions, and mortality built in. The Adapa moment, the loss of immortality. Among the most intimate sequences is the story of Adapa. According to these translations, Enki fashions an advanced human, not a servant, but a steward. He gives gifts, speech, knowledge, the tools of leadership. Adapa stands between the created and the creators. Then comes the test. Adapa is summoned before the sky god, offered eternal life, advised by Enki to refuse. He obeys. He turns away from immortality. It is an act of obedience that becomes an everlasting curse. Knowledge without immortality. Freedom without permanence. The chance to escape the system is denied by obedience itself. If you wanted a myth about why humans die, this reads like bureaucratic tragedy. Innocence becomes design. Obedience seals mortality. The flood as reset button. The tablets read the Great Flood not as moral punishment, but as administrative reset. Enlil's decision to wipe the slate clean comes from a place of control. The human project, in his view, has spun out of control. Too many have knowledge. Too many have invented tools. Too many can question. So the flood is ordered, a catastrophic rollback. Enki intervenes, but only for a few. He warns one man, saves a lineage. It is a triage, not salvation. The flood isn't symbolism. In the tablet's tone, it's a policy, which is a terrifying lens to view a catastrophe through. Not a divine mood swing, but a managerial decision to prune an experiment. Forbidden technologies. If the texts only dealt with metaphors, this would be dark enough. They do not. AI flagged repeated technical sequences. They are not vague. They include terms that, when cross-referenced, cluster around ideas. Wings and containers, heat and propulsion, bright energy that burns and leaves nothing behind. Parts, recurrence, patterns. Some lines read like catalog entries for devices, materials, assembly, operation, safety caveats. Other passages speak of mountains split with fire and cities vanished in a single day. Scholars have argued these are poetic images of storms and volcanoes, but the patterning across lines is persistent and specific. What the tablets describe looks dangerously like technology handed to favored groups and withheld from others. Metallurgy, controlled heat, perhaps even energy projection. Tools that shift an imbalance in power from natural chance to deliberate distribution. Imagine a world where metallurgy and flight are not discoveries but privileges. The watchers in the sky. For 7 centuries, priests recorded celestial events, eclipses, planetary motions, long cycles. The tablets name a recurring body with a long orbit, returning over thousands of years. A crossing that brings calamity and change. In later myth, this becomes Nibiru. In these lines, it reads like a warning sent down the ages. Cycles to prepare for, resets to fear. Those chosen by Enki, watchers or guardians, were taught astronomy and codes to preserve knowledge through those resets. The rest were deliberately left ignorant or set to forget. The implication, memory itself was curated. Knowledge was a commodity, and only some were permitted to pass it forward. The long shadow, division as design. Piece it together and you cannot escape the gravity of the idea. What if the root causes of inequality are not accidents of migration, climate, or conquest, but decisions encoded into origin stories? What if hierarchy began not with conquest, but with creation? The tablets, as AI has reconstructed them, do not use our modern words. They use work, test, name, assign. But the pattern is clear. Lines telling which groups would be taught writing, who would learn metallurgy, who would know the stars. Lines deciding who would bear names and who would be faceless hands. This is not an explanation for every injustice in history. It is at least a new context that forces us to ask deeper questions about privilege, knowledge, and whether divisions of power have roots older than civilization itself. The uncomfortable possibilities. We must be honest, these translations are new. They are being debated. Many scholars urge caution. Myth and metaphor have always held more layers than the surface reading suggests. The word clay could be symbolic. Erasure could be allegory. Pattern recognition is powerful, but it can overread. And yet, the pattern is consistent across regions, across centuries, across dialects. The same categories, the same tensions, the same technical motifs. I did not create these themes, it only revealed them in full. If the readings are even partly accurate, then two things are unavoidable. Some origin myths contain administrative memory, records of an engineered process. Knowledge and technology were tools of governance, rationed to maintain order. What do we do with the truth? If you woke tomorrow and learned your species had been designed in tiers, some bred for labor, some for leadership, how would it change you? Would it change how we view justice, history, identity? Would it change how we treat knowledge and access? There's a last poisonous twist in the tablets. The fear of cycles. The texts imply that resets return, that memory erodes, and that those who survive are the ones with the map. For millennia, stories were lost. For millennia, most people forgot. Now, in an age of machines that can read what we could not, that map is bleeding onto our screens. We are not reading a myth. We are reading choices recorded long ago, choices that shaped who would be allowed to know and who would be allowed to exist. AI didn't invent this narrative. It only translated a record we had not seen as a whole. If the tablets are accurate, then our deepest question is no longer where do we come from? It becomes who decided what we were allowed to be? And if that decision was deliberate, made before names, before cities, how do we unmake it? We found their notes. The workshop is lit again. And somewhere in that light are the instructions. Do we follow them or do we burn the ledger? If this unsettled you, if you want each fragment read aloud and examined in detail, subscribe. We'll bring the tablets back to the light, piece by piece, because history isn't done with us. And now, with AI, we finally have the tools to hear what it kept secret.